27 years old and I live alone in a ground-floor apartment in Columbus, Ohio. I moved there at the beginning of the year because of work. I work remotely for a tech support company, so I practically spend the entire day inside the apartment. The place was cheap compared to others in the area, and honestly, I didn't have much money left over to choose something better. The building is old, one of those low red brick apartment blocks with 4 apartments per hallway. My apartment is literally at street level. The bedroom window faces directly toward the sidewalk and the street in front of it. Across the street there was a building under construction that, according to the realtor, had been abandoned for months because of financial problems with the construction company. During the day it was just a concrete skeleton full of scaffolding, torn plastic blowing in the wind, and metal fencing surrounding the entrance. At night, the building was completely dark. No lights at all. And since almost nobody walked down that street after 10 at night, the entire area became way too quiet. That week I had been working later than usual because the company was having problems with its servers. I was sleeping late, waking up exhausted, and basically my routine was just computer, coffee, and trying to ignore the fact that I spent way too much time alone inside that small apartment. The first time I noticed, it was already almost 2 in the morning. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone with the TV volume very low when I saw a quick light crossing the wall of my bedroom. I thought it was a car headlight, but the street was empty. Then it happened again. This time I got up and walked to the window. There was a light moving inside the abandoned building. It was clearly a flashlight. At first I tried to rationalize it. I thought maybe it was security, a homeless person, maybe even people stealing materials from the construction site. But there was something strange about the way the light moved. It wasn't wandering randomly through the floors. It always appeared at exactly the same spot on the 3rd floor, through an opening without glass that lined up perfectly with my bedroom window. I remember the exact feeling when I realized that. My stomach immediately felt strange. The light would appear, stay still for a few seconds pointed in my direction, then slowly disappear. It wasn't someone searching for something. It looked like someone watching. I closed the curtain immediately, but I kept looking through a tiny gap. The light came back around 5 minutes later. This time it stayed longer. I could see the beam crossing the room even with the curtain closed. The apartment was silent except for the sound of the fan running and the distant hum of the refrigerator coming from the kitchen. I started feeling that real physical discomfort, the kind you get when you realize someone is staring at you in public. Even trying to act normal, I couldn't stop thinking that maybe someone across the street had been watching me for who knows how long. The worst part was that my apartment was completely visible from the position of that building, especially my bedroom. My bed, my desk, even part of the bathroom could be seen depending on the angle. I stayed awake until almost 4 in the morning staring through that crack in the curtain waiting for the light to appear again. And it did. 2 more times. Always in the same place. Always pointed at my window. The next day I tried to act like it wasn't a big deal. I made coffee, started working, and left the TV on just to have some kind of noise inside the apartment. During the day the building looked harmless. Workers had stopped construction there so long ago that trash had piled up on the floors. Plastic sheets swung in the wind, and there were fresh graffiti tags near the bottom level. Even so, I couldn't stop looking through the window. Several times throughout the day, I caught myself staring at the 3rd floor, trying to identify the exact place where the light appeared during the night. And the longer I looked, the more I realized how perfectly that spot overlooked my entire apartment. Around lunchtime, I went to the convenience store on the corner and casually asked the guy at the register if people usually entered that abandoned building. He gave a tired little laugh and said homeless people sometimes got inside, especially at night because part of the back fence was broken. I asked if the police ever came around there, and he said almost never. That didn't make me feel any better. That night I closed all the curtains before it even got dark. I also started noticing small things I had ignored before, like the fact that my bedroom window didn't lock properly, or how clearly you could see inside the apartment when the lights were on. Around midnight, I was at my computer wearing headphones when I suddenly had the feeling that someone was standing outside. I didn't hear anything specific. It was more instinct than anything. I took the headphones off and stayed completely still for a few seconds. The street was silent. Then I heard a distant metallic sound coming from the construction building. It sounded like something slowly hitting a metal bar. Then silence again. I didn't want to look through the window. Seriously. My entire body was in that strange state of anxiety where you know you're about to see something uncomfortable, but you look anyway. I pulled one corner of the curtain aside and immediately felt my chest go cold. The light was there again. Same place. 3rd floor. But this time it wasn't moving. It stayed completely still, pointed toward my apartment for so long that it started feeling way too intentional. I immediately turned off my bedroom light and crouched down near the wall. I remember the feeling of the cold floor against my arm while I tried to hear any sound coming from the street. My heart was pounding hard. After a few seconds, I looked through the gap again. The light was gone, but then I noticed something else. There was a silhouette standing in the opening of the building. I couldn't make out a face or clothes because it was too dark, but there was clearly someone there, standing still, not moving. And I became absolutely certain that whoever it was knew exactly where my bedroom was, even with the lights turned off. I stared at it for maybe 20 seconds without being able to think properly. Then the silhouette slowly stepped away from the opening and disappeared deeper into the floor. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear a door. Nothing. Just the empty silence of the street at night. I almost called the police right then, but I started thinking maybe I was overreacting. How was I supposed to explain it? There's someone standing in an abandoned building looking at my apartment. It sounded insufficient. Even so, that night I dragged my dresser in front of the bedroom window before trying to sleep. I must have slept maybe 2 hours at most because I woke up startled by a sharp noise coming from the kitchen. At first, I thought someone had broken into the apartment. I jumped out of bed completely disoriented, still dark outside, and stood frozen in the hallway trying to listen. My apartment is small, so every sound feels closer than it really is. The fan was running. The refrigerator made that constant humming noise, and for a few seconds it sounded like someone was breathing on the other side of the living room. I grabbed a kitchen knife more out of instinct than courage. When I got to the kitchen, I realized it was only a soda can that had fallen from the counter because I had left it too close to the edge. Even so, I couldn't calm down. My mind was already trapped in that paranoia about the building. I checked the living room window and noticed one of the curtains was slightly pulled aside. Just a few centimeters. Enough for someone outside to see part of the apartment illuminated by the TV I had left on. I closed it immediately. The street was still empty, but then I saw the light again briefly reflecting against a wall on the 3rd floor. It wasn't my imagination. Someone was there at that hour watching my apartment while I slept. And this time I started thinking about something I had been trying to avoid until then. What if that person had already been watching me for weeks before I noticed? I started remembering strange moments from recent weeks, like finding the curtain slightly different from the position I always left it in, or the constant feeling of discomfort at night without any clear reason. Maybe I was just connecting random things out of fear, but at that moment everything seemed to make too much sense, and the more I thought about it, the harder it became to stay inside that apartment. When morning came, I made a decision that now, looking back, feels incredibly stupid. I decided to go into the building during the day. Part of it was curiosity, but honestly, I think I just needed to prove to myself there was a normal explanation for all of it. I put on a hoodie, grabbed coffee from a cafe near my place, and crossed the street shortly after 8 in the morning. The back fence really was open like the cashier had said. There was trash everywhere. Empty bottles, leftover food, and signs that people entered there often. The smell inside the building was awful. Dust, damp concrete, old urine mixed with wet wood. As I climbed the floors, I could hear my own footsteps echoing through the empty concrete structure. That started making me nervous fast because I realized that if someone else was inside there with me, I probably wouldn't hear them approaching. By the time I reached the 3rd floor, I already regretted going. The place was much darker than it looked from the street. Some areas only had light coming through the openings without windows. I walked slowly, trying to identify the exact spot where the flashlight appeared during the night. And then I found it. In a more isolated corner of the floor, there was a makeshift area behind stacked wooden panels. There were dirty blankets on the ground, water bottles, food wrappers, cigarette butts, and a plastic chair positioned directly in front of the opening that overlooked my apartment. My window was perfectly framed from there, and the worst part wasn't even that. The worst part was realizing that whoever stayed there clearly spent hours watching that exact spot on the street. I stood there staring at it for too long. I think my brain was trying to decide whether it was really as disturbing as it seemed, or if I was exaggerating because of fear. But there was no rational way to explain that scene. The chair was literally positioned for someone to sit and stare directly into my window. There were even scrape marks on the concrete floor showing where the chair legs had been dragged back and forth, in the exact same place over and over. The ground around it was covered in empty cans, snack wrappers, 2 small flashlights, and a cheap pair of binoculars lying near the blankets. When I saw the binoculars, my throat instantly went dry. I remember feeling a strange heat rise through my neck even though the building itself was cold. I looked at my own window from there and realized something even worse. At night, with my bedroom light on, you could see practically everything inside without any effort at all. My bed, my desk, the bathroom door. I started thinking about how many nights that person had spent there watching me without me knowing. Then I heard a noise from the floor below, a quick metallic sound like something being kicked or dragged. My entire body froze instantly. I stood completely still, trying to listen again. The building stayed silent for a few seconds. Then I heard footsteps, slow footsteps, not running, coming up the stairs. The feeling in that moment was one of the worst I've ever experienced because I immediately realized something very simple. Whoever had been using that place could be coming back right now. And I was alone inside an abandoned building without anyone knowing where I had gone. At that point, I completely abandoned any idea of confronting someone. I just wanted to get out. The problem was that the footsteps kept slowly coming up the stairwell, echoing through the empty concrete building. I crouched behind the wooden panels, barely breathing. The smell of dust and old cigarette smoke was strong in that corner. My heart was beating so hard it felt loud. The footsteps stopped for a few seconds on the floor below, then continued upward. I remember looking around trying to find something to use if someone appeared. But there was nothing except debris and scattered metal bars. The light coming through the openings created strange shadows across the floor, and I started imagining the person turning the corner at any second and finding me hiding in the exact place where they had spent hours watching my apartment. Then I heard something that made it even worse. A low whistle, short, like someone trying to get another person's attention inside the building. At that moment, I stopped thinking completely. I stood up and quickly walked in the opposite direction of the stairs, trying to make as little noise as possible, but my footsteps echoed anyway. And a few seconds later, the footsteps behind me started speeding up. I ran down the stairs, practically stumbling. The concrete was covered in loose debris, dust, and abandoned tools. While I ran, I could clearly hear someone coming after me from a few floors above. It wasn't my imagination. The footsteps slammed against the metal stairs and echoed through the building. I didn't look back because honestly, I don't think I wanted to confirm that someone was chasing me. I just kept running downward, trying not to fall. When I reached the ground floor, I almost slipped in a puddle near the back entrance. I ran through the broken fence opening and crossed the street without even paying attention to traffic. My chest burned from lack of air. I got inside my apartment and locked everything immediately. Front door, kitchen window, even the old lock on the back door that I almost never used. The first thing I did was turn off every light. Then I stood near the living room window looking through the tiniest crack in the curtain, and that's when I saw someone standing on the 3rd floor of the building. This time there was no flashlight, only the silhouette. The person stood perfectly still, staring directly at my apartment. Too far away to see details, but close enough for me to understand that none of this was a coincidence. And I had a very specific feeling in that moment. That person knew I had found the setup upstairs. I can't explain why. It was just the way they stood there staring toward my window for so long without moving. I stayed there maybe 2 full minutes completely frozen, until the silhouette slowly stepped away from the opening and disappeared back inside the building. I called the police right after that. I tried explaining everything without sounding paranoid. The operator seemed skeptical at first, but said they would send a patrol car to check the building. About 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. I watched through the window while they entered through the front access. They climbed a few floors with flashlights and stayed inside for maybe 15 minutes before coming back down. Then one of them knocked on my door. He said they found signs of homeless people using the building, but nobody inside at that moment. I asked about the 3rd floor area and mentioned the chair, blankets, and binoculars. The officer looked at me strangely when I mentioned the binoculars. He asked if I had touched anything, and I said no. Then he said something that still bothers me to this day. He said situations like that happened more often than people realized. Random obsession, people choosing someone's routine to watch. He tried to sound calm, but it only made everything worse. Before leaving, he recommended that I keep the curtains closed at night and call immediately if I saw anyone in the building again. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the couch with all the lights off, listening for any noise coming from the street. And shortly after 3 in the morning, I saw a light turn on again on the 3rd floor. But this time it wasn't pointed at my window. It stayed still, illuminating the floor for a few seconds, like whoever was there knew I was also watching. I stared at that light for maybe 30 seconds before it disappeared again. After that, the street returned to complete silence. No movement, no sound from the building. But I was already so nervous that every tiny noise made my entire body react. The worst part was the feeling of being trapped inside the apartment. Every time I looked at the windows, I remembered that someone had spent who knows how many nights watching my routine from up there. I started noticing ridiculously small details, like how long I usually took to turn off my bedroom light, where I normally sat to work, what time I usually cooked dinner. All of it was visible from that 3rd floor. Sometime around 4 in the morning, I heard a noise coming from the exterior hallway of the apartment building where I lived. It wasn't loud. It sounded like someone slowly walking near the apartment doors. My blood instantly went cold. I stayed frozen on the couch, trying to hear better. Slow footsteps, then silence. Then a quiet metallic sound near my living room window. Not a hard knock, more like someone lightly tapping the outside metal bars of the window with an object. I immediately crouched behind the couch without making a sound. My heart was racing so hard I started feeling dizzy. Then I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap slowly, coming directly from the window. I could barely breathe because my mind could only think of one thing. The person from the building had crossed the street. I stayed crouched there for several minutes without any courage to look. The apartment was completely dark, and I kept trying to convince myself it could be anything else. A branch hitting metal, the building settling, a drunk person passing by. But deep down I knew it wasn't. After a while the sound stopped. I waited maybe another 5 minutes before finally gathering the courage to slowly stand up and look through the curtain gap. The street was empty, but there was something attached to the bars of my window. A small piece of silver tape reflecting the weak light from the street lamp. My stomach dropped instantly. I went to the door, grabbed a flashlight I kept in the kitchen and shined it through the curtain gap without opening it much. It wasn't random tape. It was a small X made of silver tape attached to the corner of the window bars. That hit me in a way that felt even worse than actually seeing someone standing there, because it felt intentional, like someone wanted me to know they had been there. I didn't open the window to remove it. I didn't even get close. I grabbed my phone and called the police again, this time already shaking while I spoke. The officers came back more annoyed than concerned, honestly. One of them ripped the tape off the bars and asked if I had enemies or a crazy ex-girlfriend. When I mentioned the building again, they checked it one more time and said they found nobody there. But before leaving, one of the officers asked how long I had lived there. When I answered about 6 months, he stayed quiet for a few seconds, staring at the abandoned building, and then said, "You should consider moving." After they left, I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. The sky was already starting to brighten slightly, and I was in that exhausted state where your body feels heavy but your mind refuses to shut off. I packed a small backpack with clothes, my laptop, and my charger without even thinking properly. I called my older brother, who lives about 40 minutes away, and made up an excuse saying I was having plumbing problems in the apartment and needed to stay somewhere else for the day. I didn't want to sound insane explaining everything over the phone at 5 in the morning. Before leaving, I looked one last time at the abandoned building through the kitchen window. Everything dark. No movement. Even so, I felt that same awful sensation of being watched. I hurried down to the side parking lot and got into my car, almost running. I remember my hands shaking so badly that I struggled to get the key into the ignition, and when I pulled out of the parking spot, I automatically looked toward the 3rd floor of the building. Someone was there. I couldn't make out details because it was still half dark outside, but there was clearly a silhouette standing in the opening, staring toward the street. I accelerated immediately. I didn't stay long enough to confirm anything. I spent the entire day at my brother's house, unable to relax. Several times I checked the simple security cameras I had installed inside the apartment months earlier because of package deliveries. Nothing seemed unusual during the day, just the empty, silent apartment. But near the beginning of the evening, one of the cameras detected movement in the living room. When I opened the recording, I felt my entire body go cold again. The camera only showed a few seconds of the dark living room, because I had left every light off before leaving. At first, it looked like there was nothing there. Then a shadow moved quickly near the window, then another one, and then you could clearly hear a metallic sound coming from the bars outside. Just like the night before, the camera didn't capture the outside area near the window, but it recorded something I still can't forget to this day, a low voice, very low, like someone quietly talking to themselves near the bars. You couldn't make out exact words, but it was clearly a male voice. The audio was filled with static, but you could hear breathing way too close to the window. And at the end of the video, a brief flashlight beam crossed the living room for less than a second before the recording ended. I literally turned my phone off right then. That same day, I returned to the apartment accompanied by my brother and 2 of his friends, just to grab my main belongings. The abandoned building still looked empty, apparently, but none of us could ignore the fact that the 3rd floor had a direct view straight into my entire bedroom. I moved out less than a week later. I never found out who the person in that building was, and the police never contacted me again about it. But a few months later, I happened to drive through that street while visiting a client nearby. The abandoned building was still there. Same appearance, same opening on the 3rd floor, and even from inside a moving car, I felt that horrible sensation again when I looked up, because there was a chair positioned in the exact same spot. Story 2. I was 17 years old when this happened. I live in a pretty normal residential neighborhood on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, one of those places where all the houses practically look the same and sit way too close to each other. My street is full of families, kids riding bikes during the day, and neighbors who know everyone by name. My parents had traveled that week to visit my aunt in Ohio, and I stayed home alone because I still had school on Monday and didn't want to miss it. At first, it sounded great to me. I thought it would just be a quiet night playing video games, ordering food, and staying up late without anyone bothering me. My house has 2 floors, and my bedroom is at the front with a large window facing directly toward the street and the rooftops of the neighboring houses. The houses there are so close together that someone could practically jump from one roof to another if they wanted to. That night was colder than usual for the season. I think it was early November. The wind made noise through the dry trees lining the street, and every now and then you could hear those metal antenna structures creaking on top of the roofs. I stayed up late playing online with friends on my computer, and afterward kept watching videos on my phone. When I looked at the clock, it was already almost 2 in the morning. The street was completely silent, no cars passing anymore, and it was exactly in that silence that I started hearing the first noise coming from outside. At first, it sounded like the normal noise of something creaking on the roof. My house was old, and during cold nights there were always sounds coming from the wood or the gutters. But then I clearly heard footsteps. Slow, heavy enough that it didn't sound like a cat or raccoon. I paused the video on my phone and tried listening more carefully. The sound came from the left side of my house, more specifically from the neighbor's roof. Dragging footsteps, a slow sequence of weight pressing against the shingles. I remember feeling that instant discomfort you get when something doesn't make sense at that hour of the night. I got out of bed and walked to the window thinking maybe it was some guy fixing an antenna or something. When I pulled part of the curtain aside, I immediately saw a person crouched on the roof of the house next door. And to this day, I remember the exact feeling of that moment, because my brain took several seconds to accept what I was seeing. The figure was completely motionless, crouched near the edge of the roof. Too dark to clearly see a face or clothes, but it was obvious that someone was staring directly toward my window. It didn't look like someone working. It didn't look like a drunk person. It didn't look like a neighbor doing something normal. It was just a person sitting on a roof in the middle of the night staring into my bedroom without moving. And the longer I looked at it, the more I realized that maybe that person had already been there for quite some time before I noticed. I stood behind the curtain trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to believe it was some neighbor working on something up there, but the more I looked, the less normal it seemed. The figure did absolutely nothing. Didn't adjust their balance, didn't look at a phone, didn't glance around, just stayed crouched staring in my direction. The wind was strong at that hour, slowly moving the tree in front of the house and casting shifting shadows across the street, but the person remained completely still. I remember my arms feeling cold even though I was inside my bedroom. I grabbed my phone and texted a friend asking if he was still awake. I couldn't even properly explain why. While waiting for a response, I kept watching through the small gap in the curtain. At one point, the figure slightly tilted its head to the side, and that gave me a horrible feeling because it confirmed it really was someone watching me, and not some illusion caused by the darkness. My bedroom was partially lit by the still-running computer monitor, so they could probably see me clearly from there. I immediately turned the monitor off and stepped away from the window. But even away from it, I could still hear the quiet creaking of shingles outside. It sounded like the person was still moving slowly around on the neighbor's roof. My mind started trying to rationalize stupid possibilities. I thought maybe it was a homeless person, someone hiding from the police, even teenagers doing some online challenge. But none of those things explained why the person was specifically staring at my window. After a few minutes, I gathered the courage to look again. This time, the figure was closer to the edge of the roof. I didn't see them move there. They were just in a different position now, closer to the side separating my neighbor's house from mine, and that made me feel much worse. I remember my heart genuinely speeding up when I realized it, because it felt like they were slowly getting closer without making enough noise for me to notice. The person was still crouched, but now I could distinguish the body shape more clearly against the dark sky. It looked like a thin man wearing a dark hoodie with the hood up, but there was something strange about the way he moved. Too slow, almost overly careful. While I watched, he placed one hand on the edge of the roof and slowly crouched down even further. Then he simply disappeared from sight. He didn't jump. He didn't fall. He just vanished below the roofline like he had climbed down the other side. The moment that happened, my stomach dropped because I instantly realized something. The other side of that roof was the narrow passageway between my neighbor's house and mine. I waited to hear footsteps leaving but heard nothing. The silence somehow became even worse. I think about 2 minutes passed before I heard a very quiet sound coming from the outside wall of my house. Tap, tap, tap slowly, like someone tapping their fingers against the exterior wall near my window. The moment I heard that, my entire body locked up. The sound was clearly coming from outside my bedroom wall. It wasn't a branch. It wasn't the wind. It was too rhythmic. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 3 more. I stood frozen in the middle of my room trying to control my breathing, because suddenly everything sounded too loud. The ceiling fan, the tiny creaks of the house wood. Even my own breathing sounded noisy. I grabbed my phone again and saw my friend still hadn't replied. I thought about calling my parents, but honestly, I didn't want to sound paranoid in the middle of the night because of some strange person on a roof. The problem was that none of this felt like coincidence anymore. The sound continued, now closer to the window. Tap, tap. Slowly dragging along the exterior wall like someone was running their hand across the side of the house while moving. My window was on the 2nd floor, so for someone to touch it from that height, they would need to be standing on a ladder, the gutter, or hanging onto some structure outside. And when I realized that, I started imagining the person literally clinging to the side of my house directly beneath my window. The worst part was not being able to see anything without exposing myself by looking through the curtain. I was trying to decide whether to call the police when I heard another sound coming from the narrow passage between the houses. A short metallic scraping noise, like someone putting weight on a gutter or an aluminum ladder. I couldn't resist anymore and went back to the window, this time moving very slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. I pulled aside only a tiny corner of the curtain and looked down. At first, I saw nothing except darkness in the narrow space between the houses. The streetlight barely reached there. I could only make out the outline of the wooden fence and some trash cans near my neighbor's garage. Then I heard breathing, very quiet, so close that my entire body instantly went cold. I looked further to the right and saw part of a hand gripping the outer edge of my window from below. It was only a quick glimpse, but enough. A pale hand holding onto the ledge outside. I instantly let the curtain fall and stumbled backward, almost tripping over my computer chair. My chest started hurting from how hard my heart was pounding, and then I heard a small creaking sound coming from the window, like someone was slowly testing it. My old window opened by sliding sideways and had never locked properly. I remember the horrible feeling of realizing that in that exact moment, I ran into my parents' bedroom, grabbed my dad's old baseball bat from the closet and locked my bedroom door, even though I knew that probably wouldn't help much if the person actually tried to come inside. Silence returned for a few seconds. Then I heard a slow dragging sound coming from the roof directly above my room, like the person had climbed back up. I sat on the floor holding the bat without being able to stop staring at the window. The adrenaline was so intense that my hands were shaking. The worst part was not knowing exactly where that person was now. The sound on the roof had stopped suddenly, meaning they could literally be right above me or still hanging outside the house. I grabbed my phone again and this time called the police without thinking anymore. I spoke too quickly at first because I was nervous, but I explained that someone was walking across the rooftops and trying to mess with my window. The operator asked if I could still see the person, and I said no, but I could hear movement above my room. While I was talking on the phone, I heard another creak from the window. Stronger this time, almost like someone had put weight on it. The operator told me to stay inside a locked room until officers arrived. It sounded simple hearing him say it, but every second inside that bedroom felt much longer. After hanging up, I kept trying to hear anything outside. The street remained completely silent. No cars, no dogs barking, just that still residential neighborhood atmosphere in the middle of the night. Then I heard footsteps again. Slow, on my roof this time. The sound came directly above my bedroom and echoed through the ceiling in irregular intervals. One step, long pause, another step. Like the person was trying to make as little noise as possible while moving. At some point, the footsteps stopped directly above my bed, and that was worse than hearing constant movement. I stared at the ceiling, imagining someone standing right above me, listening to everything I was doing inside the room. Then I heard a sharp crack from the gutter outside, followed by the quick vibration of metal, like someone had slipped or lost their footing for a second. Then complete silence again. I think 2 minutes passed like that before I heard a very quiet noise coming from the hallway inside the house. My blood instantly froze. I was absolutely certain I was alone in the house. I gripped the bat tighter and listened carefully. It sounded like someone slowly stepping on the wooden floor downstairs. One short creak, then another. My brain immediately panicked because I thought maybe the person had gotten in through another window or the back door. I stood frozen without breathing, trying to decide whether I should leave the room or not. Then I heard something else, a soft knock at the front door. Tap tap, it didn't sound like someone trying to enter normally. It was too soft, too deliberate. A few seconds later, the red and blue police lights finally flashed across my window. I practically ran into the hallway when I heard the patrol cars stopping outside. And at the exact same moment, I heard a loud sound coming from the roof above the garage, like someone jumping and running to the other side of the house. The officers came in quickly through the front door after I unlocked it. I think I was so nervous I could barely explain what had happened. I told them about the person on the roof, the hand at the window, the sounds in the side passageway. One officer stayed with me in the living room while the other went around the back of the house with a flashlight. A few minutes later, another patrol car arrived and they started checking the neighboring backyards. I stood watching everything through the living room window, still shaking. The street that had been completely empty earlier was now filled with flashing lights reflecting off the houses. Some neighbors started turning on their bedroom lights, but nobody came outside. One of the officers came back after a few minutes and asked exactly where I had first seen the person. I showed him my bedroom window and the roof next door. They shined powerful flashlights across everything, but obviously there was nobody there anymore. Even so, they found something strange in the narrow passage between my house and the neighbors. There were fresh dirt marks and scratches on the gutter near my window, like someone really had used it to climb. When I heard that, my stomach dropped again because it meant I hadn't imagined any of it. One of the officers asked if I had enemies at school or someone bothering me online. I said no. Honestly, I was a pretty normal teenager. I didn't have problems with anyone. And somehow that made everything worse because it meant the person was probably a complete stranger. After almost half an hour of searching, the officers said they hadn't found anyone hiding in the yards or on the rooftops. One of them recommended that I sleep in my parents' bedroom that night and keep everything locked. They also suggested I contact my parents immediately. When the patrol cars finally left, the street returned to silence very quickly. That bothered me a lot because it felt like everything had returned to normal way too fast after what had happened. I stayed in my parents' room with all the lights on trying to watch TV, just to keep some noise inside the house. My parents answered the phone already terrified and said they would come back early in the morning. I think I slept maybe 1 hour at most before sunrise. When morning came, my dad and I went outside to check around the house after they arrived. The daylight made everything seem less frightening, but then we found something else. Right below my window, near the damp dirt beside the wall, there were clear sneaker prints. Not just one or two, several. Like someone had stood there for a long time, staring upward. My dad tried to stay calm, but you could tell it shook him too. We installed cameras a few days later and reinforced every window in the house. We never saw anyone on the roof again, but for weeks afterward I still woke up in the middle of the night every time I heard any sound coming from outside. And even today, whenever I see houses built too close together, I remember the horrible feeling of looking through the window and realizing there was someone crouched on the roof watching me in the dark. Story 3. I'm 31 years old and I live alone in an apartment in Minneapolis. I moved here for work about 2 years ago, and ever since then my routine has basically become working late and coming home exhausted almost every day. I'm an assistant manager at a restaurant downtown, so my hours are terrible. Normally I leave after 10 at night and get home close to midnight. The building where I live isn't luxurious, but it's not bad either. It has about 8 floors, a small gym on the ground level, and an underground parking garage accessed through an automatic gate. The closed parking garage was actually the reason I chose that place when I moved in. I got home late almost every day and liked the idea of not having to leave my car parked on the street. The underground garage had 2 levels and felt kind of dark even during the daytime. Old fluorescent lights, gray concrete everywhere, and that constant smell of oil, dust, and humidity. I always thought the environment was uncomfortable, but it was the kind of thing you ignore once you get used to it. Most nights I would get out of the car, grab my things quickly, and head straight to the elevator without thinking much about it. But a few months before I decided to move out of that building, I started noticing something strange every time I got home from work. On the lower level of the garage, there was an area partially hidden behind a structural column near the service elevator. It was a blind spot. Depending on the angle, you would only notice someone standing there when you were already relatively close. The first time I saw the man, I thought he was probably a resident waiting for an Uber or smoking secretly. He was standing against the wall looking toward the parked cars. He wasn't using his phone, wasn't smoking, wasn't doing anything. Just standing there. I remember thinking it was strange because it was already close to midnight and the garage was completely empty. I walked past him quickly without really looking at his face. I only noticed he was wearing a dark jacket and a low baseball cap covering part of his face. When I pressed the elevator button, I got that uncomfortable feeling of someone watching me from behind. Even so, I tried to ignore it. But the next day, when I got home from work again, he was in the same place. Exactly the same position, standing behind the column looking toward the parked cars. And that started happening several nights in a row. I never saw him getting into a car. I never saw him arriving or leaving. He was simply already there when I arrived. Always motionless. Always in that same partially hidden spot in the underground garage. After the 4th or 5th time, I started paying more attention to him. Not obviously, because honestly I didn't want to attract attention from some strange man in an empty parking garage at night. But I started noticing small details while walking toward the elevator. The man looked maybe in his 40s, though it was hard to tell because of the terrible underground lighting. He always wore dark clothes, heavy jacket, loose pants, and that same low cap hiding part of his face. I never saw him talking on the phone or doing anything normal that would justify standing there for so long. And the strangest thing was that he never looked directly at me when I walked by. He kept staring at the cars or the floor. But even then, I could clearly feel that he noticed every movement I made. It was a physical sensation. That uncomfortable awareness of being watched without being able to prove it. One night I dropped my keys near the elevator because my hands were freezing from the cold. When I bent down to pick them up, I heard a small movement behind the column. I didn't look immediately, but my entire body tensed up instantly. I got into the elevator way too fast and pressed the button for my floor multiple times for no reason. As the doors closed, I looked toward the garage through the narrow opening and saw him standing a few steps farther forward than usual. I don't know why that scared me so much. Maybe because it was the first time I felt like he was getting closer. I told my friend Jenna about it a few days later at work. She said it was probably just some weird resident or outsourced security guard doing rounds. I tried accepting that explanation because it was better than thinking something worse. Even so, I started changing small habits without realizing it. I began preparing everything inside the car before parking so I could get out faster. I also avoided looking directly toward the column when entering the garage. But my body always looked automatically anyway, and he was almost always there. The routine became so consistent that I started feeling anxious before even getting home. The entire parking garage felt different knowing he would be there. More silent, more closed in. The sound of my own footsteps echoing against the concrete started bothering me a lot. One night I heard footsteps too while walking toward the elevator. Not directly behind me, more toward the side of the column, like he had changed positions while I walked past. That time I got into the elevator without looking back. My heart was genuinely racing. As the doors started closing, I finally dared to raise my eyes toward the metallic reflection in the elevator doors and saw something moving quickly in the garage. I can't say with 100% certainty that it was him, but it looked like someone walking toward the elevator right before the doors completely shut. I spent the rest of the night awake thinking about it. The following week, I seriously considered reporting it to building management. The problem was that I had nothing concrete to say besides, "There's a strange man standing in the garage." And technically, he hadn't done anything. He never spoke to me, never tried touching me, never blocked my path. Even so, it was starting to affect my mind in a very real way. I got home already nervous, anticipating the moment I would park. Some nights I drove extra laps around the block just to delay entering the underground garage. The worst part was that nobody else seemed to notice that guy except me. One time I got home earlier than usual from work, around 10 at night, and the garage was relatively busy. I saw 2 residents unloading groceries, a couple entering the elevator, and a delivery driver leaving through the side access. And that day, the man wasn't there. That gave me enormous relief for a few minutes. I almost convinced myself I had exaggerated everything in my head. But the next day, when I came home at the normal time close to midnight, he had reappeared in the exact same place behind the column. That made me feel even worse because it started seeming like he appeared specifically when the garage was empty. And the more I thought about it, the more I began noticing strange details about the way he stayed there. He seemed too patient, like someone waiting for something specific to happen. On one particularly exhausting Friday, I left work earlier because the restaurant closed ahead of schedule due to an electrical problem. I got to the building shortly after 9:30 at night. The garage was almost empty like always, but there was one immediate difference I noticed the second I drove in. The man wasn't by the column. I automatically slowed down, looking toward the spot where he usually stood. Nothing. Just empty concrete and a fluorescent light flickering weakly against the wall. I admit I felt ridiculous relief in that moment, like pressure leaving my chest after weeks. I parked more calmly than usual, grabbed my purse, and started walking toward the elevator. The silence in the underground garage felt strange that night, heavier. All I could hear was the buzzing of the lights and the distant echo of the garage ventilation system. When I pressed the elevator button, I noticed my hands were still trembling slightly, even for no reason. I think I had already become conditioned to that tension. The doors opened almost immediately, and I stepped inside while looking at my phone, replying to a message from Jenna. The elevator had mirrors on the inside walls, the kind that make the space look larger, and it was exactly in the reflection of the side mirror that I saw someone standing behind me. My entire body went cold so fast it felt like I couldn't breathe, because the person was positioned in the exact same angle and posture the man usually had behind the column in the garage. I turned around so quickly that my purse hit the elevator wall. There was nobody there. The space behind me was empty. The doors were still open, showing the silent parking garage outside. But I know what I saw in that reflection. It wasn't a quick illusion like a shadow or weird lighting. I clearly saw the shape of a man standing behind me for less than a second before I turned around. Dark jacket, cap, the same motionless posture. My heart immediately started pounding hard. I stepped out of the elevator instantly without even thinking and looked around the garage. Nothing, no sound, nobody walking. The entire place seemed empty again. I stood there for several seconds trying to convince myself the mirror had distorted something. Maybe a reflection from the hallway. Maybe someone had quickly walked past before the doors closed. But deep down, I knew none of that explained the horrible feeling I had in that moment. I got back into the elevator and pressed my floor button while practically shaking. During the ride up, I kept staring at the metallic reflections on the walls the entire time. I couldn't stop. When the doors opened on my floor, I practically ran to my apartment and locked everything the second I got inside. For the first time since I started seeing that man, I felt real fear inside my own apartment. It wasn't just discomfort in the parking garage anymore. It felt like something had crossed that boundary with me. That night I couldn't sleep properly. I kept replaying the reflection in my head over and over. The more I thought about it, the more details seemed to return. The motionless posture, the way he had seemed way too close to me inside the elevator. At some point after 2 in the morning, I went to the kitchen to get water and noticed something strange through the living room window. My apartment was on the 5th floor and had a partial view of the exterior parking garage entrance. You couldn't see inside the garage itself, but you could see the car entrance and the small pedestrian area near the gate, and someone was standing down there. I couldn't distinguish a face from that distance, but the person stood motionless near the side entrance looking toward the building. I watched for a few seconds hidden behind the curtain. Then the figure slowly walked toward the gate and disappeared from my field of vision. Instantly, I felt that same cold sensation in my stomach again. I grabbed my phone and opened the condominium camera app because the building provided basic camera access to residents. The parking garage cameras had terrible quality, but I decided to check the recordings from that night anyway. And that's when I became genuinely scared. The elevator camera clearly showed me entering alone at 9:37 p.m. Alone, there was nobody behind me in the video, but a few seconds before the doors closed, you could see a shadow appearing in the metallic reflection of the elevator wall exactly where I had seen the man. I watched that section of footage several times trying to find a logical explanation. The quality was terrible, filled with static and shadows caused by the fluorescent lighting inside the elevator. Even so, you could clearly make out a dark shape appearing behind me for an instant in the reflection of the metal wall. It didn't clearly look like a person in the video, but it was enough to make me deeply uncomfortable because I knew exactly what I had seen in real life. The more I paused and replayed the footage, the worse I felt. At one point, I even started questioning whether I was falling into some extreme paranoia because of that man in the garage. I closed the app and tried ignoring it, but my brain wouldn't shut off. I kept paying attention to every sound coming from the building hallway. The elevator moving, doors opening, distant footsteps. Everything felt threatening that night. I think I managed to fall asleep around 4 in the morning, but I woke up shortly afterward when my phone vibrated. It was an automatic notification from the condominium app saying motion detected on one of the parking garage cameras. My entire body instantly woke up. I opened the video while still lying in bed and immediately felt that horrible tightness in my chest again. The camera showed the lower level empty for a few seconds until someone entered the frame from the area near the column. It was him. Even with the terrible image quality, I immediately recognized the posture and dark clothes. The man slowly walked toward the main elevator and stood there staring directly into the camera for several seconds without moving. The worst part came afterward. The man took a few steps to the side and partially left the frame. But before disappearing completely, he slowly raised his arm and pointed upward, not randomly. It looked directed toward a specific floor in the building. I stared at that, unable to breathe properly because I immediately felt like he knew exactly where I lived. I shut the video off and started packing a bag immediately. I didn't even think clearly. I just wanted to get out of that apartment before night came again. I called the restaurant saying I was sick and spent the entire morning at Jenna's house trying to decide what to do. I showed her the footage, and for the first time someone confirmed that it really did look strange. She asked if I wanted to go to the police, but honestly, I didn't know what to say. "There's a man standing in the garage looking at the camera." It sounded like too little. Even so, that afternoon I went to speak with the building manager. I showed him the video and explained everything about the man appearing in the same underground spot every night. The manager became serious immediately after seeing the footage. He asked how long it had been happening and then said something that made me go cold. He said another resident had complained months earlier about someone standing in that same spot in the garage, but she moved out shortly afterward, and they never did anything because the cameras never showed direct harassment or an actual crime happening. When I heard that, I got a horrible feeling because it meant I might not have been the first person being watched by that man in that building. The manager promised to increase security that week and said he would warn the front desk employees about the man. He also suggested I avoid arriving home alone late at night until the situation was resolved. All of that sounded helpful while sitting there in the bright management office during the daytime, but eventually I still had to go back to the apartment. I spent almost the entire day trying to convince myself that maybe now, after the complaint, everything would finally stop. But once night came, I started feeling that anxiety again just thinking about the underground garage. Jenna insisted on accompanying me back to the building after work that night. By the time we arrived, it was already after 11. She kept trying to casually talk to me inside the car while we drove down into the garage, but I could barely pay attention. The second we entered the lower level, I automatically looked toward the column. The space was empty, no sign of the man. Even so, I couldn't relax. Jenna immediately noticed my state and even joked that maybe the weird parking garage guy had finally given up. The two of us got out of the car and walked quickly toward the elevator. And that's when I heard a sound coming from behind the column. A small dragging sound like a shoe scraping against concrete. We both stopped immediately. Jenna looked at me without saying anything. The silence in that garage felt way too heavy. Then we saw a shadow slowly move behind the structural column. You still couldn't see the entire person. Only part of a dark shoulder slowly appearing as if someone was leaning out to watch us. My body instantly froze. Jenna grabbed my arm toward the elevator and pressed the button multiple times while we kept staring at the column. The shadow didn't fully step out. It kept appearing and disappearing behind the concrete, like the person was slowly leaning to look in our direction. The elevator took much longer than usual. At least it felt that way. I could hear my own breathing and the buzzing fluorescent lights echoing through the entire underground level. Then the figure partially stepped out from behind the column. It was the man. Same dark clothes, same low cap covering his face. And this time he was looking directly at both of us without even trying to hide it. Jenna whispered, "Come on," while pulling my arm harder. When the elevator doors finally opened, we got inside way too fast and she repeatedly pressed the close button. And while the doors were shutting, I saw something that still disturbs me to remember. The man started walking toward us slowly. Not running, not yelling. Just walking with a calmness that felt deeply wrong across the empty parking garage, while staring directly into the elevator. The last thing I saw before the doors fully closed was him stopping exactly where I used to walk every single night alone after work. The moment the doors shut, Jenna immediately started talking quickly, saying this wasn't normal, and that I needed to call the police right away. I could barely respond. My entire body was shaking. The elevator felt way too small during the ride up. I stared at the floor indicator, trying to hear whether someone was running after us or calling the elevator again. When we reached the 5th floor, we practically ran down the hallway to my apartment. I locked the door, and Jenna immediately went to the living room window to look toward the parking garage entrance below. A few seconds later, she called me over in a strange tone. When I walked to the window, she subtly pointed toward the area near the side gate. The man was down there again, standing near the pedestrian entrance, staring toward the building. Even from that distance, you could tell he was standing far too still. Jenna stayed silent for a few seconds before asking how long exactly this had been happening. When I answered almost 3 weeks, she looked at me like she finally understood why I had been so nervous lately. We called the police that same night. This time I had a witness, recordings, and a consistent description of the man repeatedly appearing in the garage. The officers arrived relatively quickly, talked to both of us, and checked the entire building. They also reviewed the camera footage with the night manager, but just like the other times, the man simply wasn't there anymore when they arrived. One of the officers asked something that immediately made me uncomfortable. He wanted to know whether I had a fixed schedule arriving home. When I answered that I got home around midnight almost every day because of work. He exchanged a quick glance with his partner before continuing his questions. They asked for a detailed description of the man, asked whether he had ever spoken to me or tried direct contact, and then recommended I avoid using the underground garage alone until they identified who he was. They also suggested temporarily changing my routine. That night, Jenna slept at my apartment because I couldn't imagine staying there alone. And honestly, I think that was for the best, because around 3 in the morning we heard a sound coming from the hallway outside my floor, slow footsteps. It wasn't unusual to hear neighbors late at night, but those footsteps stopped directly in front of my apartment door. Both of us froze completely in the living room listening. The silence afterward felt even worse. Then something lightly scraped against the bottom of the door. A short sound of paper sliding across the floor. Jenna slowly stood up while I remained frozen, unable to breathe properly. When she looked down near the door, there was a small folded piece of paper partially pushed through the gap underneath. And written on it, in crooked handwritten letters, was only one sentence. "You arrive earlier when you're not alone." Story 4. I had just turned 29 when I moved into a shared house in Portland, Oregon. I was going through a pretty rough financial phase after ending a long relationship and moving out of the apartment I shared with my ex. Renting a place alone in that area was way too expensive, so I started looking for rooms in shared houses near downtown. The house where this happened seemed like a good opportunity at first. It was large, old, One of those American wooden houses with 2 floors, a long hallway, and floors that creaked in practically every corner. The rent was way cheaper compared to other listings, but honestly, I was more worried about finding any place quickly than asking too many questions. The owner was a guy named Martin, probably in his 50s, quiet, kind of socially awkward but polite. He lived in the house himself along with 2 other tenants that I almost never saw because they worked different hours than I did. My room was on the 2nd floor, almost at the end of the hallway, and at the very end of that hallway, there was a door that always stayed closed. Unlike the others, that door had an old lock, peeling paint, and looked like it hadn't been used in a very long time. The first time I casually asked about the room, Martin only replied that it was an old storage room and quickly changed the subject. I didn't think much about it at the time. Honestly, I was too exhausted from moving to care about a locked room in an old house. During the first week, everything seemed relatively normal. The house was silent most of the time, especially at night, and maybe too silent. There was no traffic noise because the street was residential. So after 10 at night, you could hear practically every sound inside the house. Floorboards creaking, pipes vibrating, the old heater turning on in the middle of the night. Normal old house sounds. I worked remotely back then, so I spent a lot of time in my room on my computer and usually stayed up late watching videos or playing online games. It was during one of those late nights, almost 1 in the morning, that I first heard a sound coming from the end of the hallway. It sounded like something slowly dragging across the floor, a short scraping sound against wood. At first I thought one of the other tenants was moving furniture or boxes around, but then I heard light footsteps, very light. They didn't sound like normal footsteps walking through the hallway. They were too slow, like someone barefoot trying not to make noise. I paused the video on my computer and listened carefully. The sounds were clearly coming from the direction of the locked room. And what immediately bothered me was remembering that according to Martin, nobody even used that room. Even so, I heard another dragging sound from inside, then complete silence again. The next day I tried to completely ignore it. Shared houses always have strange noises. People walking late at night, old pipes, wood expanding in the cold. I kept repeating that to myself while working at my computer. But that night I heard the sounds again. This time later, almost 2 in the morning. I was lying in bed using my phone when I heard a small impact coming from the end of the hallway. It sounded like something light falling onto the floor. Then I heard that same dragging noise again, like wood scraping slowly against the floor. My room was close enough that I could clearly tell exactly where the sounds were coming from. The locked room. And the more I listened, the more I realized something strange. The noises happened in very specific intervals. 1 short dragging sound, long pause, 2 light footsteps, then silence. It didn't sound like someone normally moving around inside a room. It felt almost too careful. I sat on my bed listening more closely when something happened that genuinely made me uncomfortable. I clearly heard something touch the inside of that room's door. Not a loud knock, more like fingers slowly pressing against the wood. The moment I heard it, I felt that cold sensation in my stomach that happens when your brain notices something wrong before you can rationalize it. I got up and walked to my bedroom door, staring into the dark hallway. The only light came from a small yellowish lamp near the staircase. The end of the hallway was almost entirely covered in shadow, and the room door remained closed exactly as always. I stood there for a few seconds listening. No sound, no movement. The hallway was completely silent again. I almost went back into my room when I heard another small noise from inside. A short dragging sound on the floor followed by a faint creak of wood. I remember feeling embarrassed with myself for being nervous over an old room in a shared house. But honestly, there was something deeply wrong about it. Maybe it was the hour. Maybe it was how careful the sound seemed. Maybe it was simply knowing that supposedly nobody had used that room for years. The next morning I decided to directly ask Martin while he was making coffee in the kitchen. I tried sounding casual, but I asked whether anyone had access to the room at the end of the hallway because I kept hearing noises coming from there during the night. He stopped stirring his spoon in the mug for a second before answering. I remember that clearly because it was too strange of a reaction for such a simple question. Then he said nobody used that room. When I mentioned the footsteps and dragging sounds, he visibly became uncomfortable. He only said the house was old and made lots of noise at night. Then he added something that made me feel even worse. That room had been locked for years and nobody had entered it since before he bought the house. After that, he immediately changed the subject and left the kitchen. And for the first time I started feeling like maybe he was hiding something about that room. That night I tried going to sleep early specifically so I would stop thinking about it. But the more I tried ignoring it, the more aware I became of every sound in the house. The second-floor hallway felt different after the conversation with Martin. Heavier. Every time I left my room to use the bathroom, I automatically looked toward the end of the hallway. The door remained closed, motionless, with old peeling paint near the doorknob. I think it was around 1:30 in the morning when I woke up because of a sound coming from the hallway. It wasn't loud. It sounded like someone slowly walking across the wooden floor. Light footsteps, one at a time. My body woke up instantly because I recognized the sound before even opening my eyes. I stayed still in bed listening. The footsteps were coming from the end of the hallway again, but now they didn't sound like they were inside the room. They sounded outside the door. I sat up in bed trying to listen better while my heart sped up. The hallway went silent for a few seconds. Then I heard a small dragging sound near my door, not inside my room. Out in the hallway. The feeling I had in that moment was horrible because I immediately imagined someone standing outside my room slowly moving through the dark hallway. I grabbed my phone to check the time and noticed my hands were trembling slightly. The entire house was silent besides those sounds. No TV on, no other tenant awake, just those slow spaced-out footsteps coming from the second-floor hallway. I spent almost 5 minutes without the courage to open the door. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have opened it if I hadn't heard another sound immediately afterward. A slow hinge creaking from the end of the hallway. My stomach instantly dropped because I immediately recognized the sound of a door slowly opening. I got up almost automatically and walked toward my bedroom door, trying to make as little noise as possible. When I opened it just a few inches, I felt the cold hallway air entering the room. The light near the staircase was still on, partially illuminating the long hallway. And the first thing I noticed was that the door to the room at the end of the hallway was slightly open. I froze immediately. My brain took a few seconds to process it because I was absolutely certain it always remained closed. Always. Now there was a narrow, dark opening in the middle of the door. I couldn't see anything inside from that distance. Only darkness. And the worst part was that the hallway itself was completely empty. No person walking around. None of the other tenants. Even so, I could still hear that faint movement. Except it wasn't coming from the room anymore. It was coming from somewhere in the hallway between my room and the partially open door. A slow dragging sound across wood followed by nearly silent footsteps, like someone slowly moving through the darkness without me being able to see exactly where. I stood there holding the doorknob, unable to decide whether I should immediately shut the door or keep looking down the hallway. Part of me still tried finding some rational explanation. Maybe Martin had opened the room that night. Maybe one of the other tenants was walking around in the dark. But the problem was the silence. If a normal person was in that hallway, I would hear breathing, clearer footsteps, some light turning on. Instead, the sounds remained strangely light and spaced apart. One small dragging sound. Long pause, 2 slow footsteps. Then silence. And the room door at the end of the hallway remained open in the exact same position. I remember the physical sensation of that moment because it felt like the hallway air was colder than the rest of the house. I kept staring at the dark space between the open door and the frame, trying to see something inside. At one point, I thought I saw movement in the darkness of the room. Not clearly. More like a shadow slowly shifting position. My entire body tensed instantly. I automatically stepped backward and the floor creaked softly beneath my foot. The second that happened, every sound stopped. Completely. The hallway became silent in a way that felt almost uncomfortable. Then I heard a single creak from inside the open room, like someone slowly placing weight onto the floorboards inside. I immediately shut my bedroom door and locked it. I remember feeling embarrassed by my reaction at the time, but honestly, my instincts were screaming at me to stay away from that hallway. I sat on my bed listening for several minutes. No sound, no footsteps, nothing. The silence made me feel worse because it seemed like something had stopped moving precisely after realizing I was watching. I think I fell asleep from exhaustion around 4 in the morning, but I woke up early still thinking about it. The moment I left my room, I automatically looked toward the end of the hallway. The door was closed again, exactly like it always was, and that bothered me more than if it had remained open. I immediately went downstairs to the kitchen, determined to seriously talk to Martin. When I told him the door had appeared open during the night, he looked genuinely shaken for the first time since I moved into the house. He didn't laugh or change the subject. He just stared at me silently for a few seconds. I directly asked whether anyone else had a key to that room. He answered no. Then I asked why that room had stayed locked for so many years. Martin took a while before answering. Then he only said that the house's previous owner had kept that room closed ever since her son died there many years earlier. The moment I heard that, my stomach went cold. But before I could ask anything else, he quickly added that he didn't believe in that kind of nonsense, and that probably one of the other tenants had opened the door as a joke. Except while saying that, I clearly noticed he avoided looking toward the end of the hallway. After that conversation, I started noticing Martin avoided going upstairs at night. During the day, he acted normally, watched TV in the living room, made coffee, worked on plants in the backyard, but after dark, he always seemed to find reasons to stay downstairs. That started bothering me more than the story about the previous owner's son, because it felt like he also disliked that hallway after a certain hour. The next night, I intentionally tried staying awake to see if I would hear the sounds again. I left my bedroom door slightly open, lights off, and sat in my computer chair listening to music through one earbud, so I could still pay attention to the sounds in the house. Around 1 a.m, I heard the first creak from the hallway. My entire body went alert instantly. Then came that same slow dragging sound across the wooden floor, very similar to something heavy being slowly pulled. I immediately removed the earbud and stayed motionless listening. The sound seemed closer this time. It wasn't coming exactly from the end of the hallway anymore. It sounded like it began near the locked room and slowly moved through the hallway toward my bedroom. Dragging, pause, light footsteps. Dragging again. My heart started beating so hard I could hear it in the silence of the room. And then I heard something that had never happened before. A low breathing sound in the hallway, not close enough to sound right outside my door, but clearly human, slow, uneven, like someone standing still trying to catch their breath. I should have stayed inside my room and ignored it, but at that moment curiosity and nervousness won. I slowly stood up and walked toward the crack in the door. The hallway was almost completely dark, because that night the staircase light was turned off. Only a faint glow came from the bathroom window at the end of the hallway, and it was because of that little bit of light that I immediately realized the room door was open again, more open than the first time. This time I could actually see part of the dark interior, only shadows and vague shapes. I stared at it, trying to understand if someone was really inside. Then I heard a small sound much closer, not from the room, from the hallway. A light footstep on the wooden floor just a few feet beyond my door. My entire body froze, because I couldn't see anyone there. Even so, I clearly heard another slow step coming toward me, then a short dragging sound, like something being pulled across the floor. I immediately backed into my room while trying to spot any movement in the darkness of the hallway. And then the worst part happened. I saw a shadow quickly pass across the opposite hallway wall. Not a shadow caused by light. It literally looked like the outline of someone slowly walking between my room and the bathroom. Far too silent to be normal. At the exact same moment, I heard another floorboard creak directly in front of my open doorway. I slammed my bedroom door shut immediately and shoved my computer chair against it, more out of instinct than logic. My entire body was shaking. I stood there trying to hear anything outside while holding my breath. The hallway went silent again for a few seconds. Then I heard a very quiet sound directly near my door. It didn't sound like knocking. It sounded more like fingers slowly sliding across the wood from outside, a soft dragging noise, far too slow. I remember staring at the bottom of the door expecting to see shadows of feet or movement in the hallway. But there was nothing, only that horrible silence of the old house in the middle of the night. Then I heard another floorboard creak, closer, like someone had stopped directly outside my room. My heart was pounding so hard it started making me nauseous. I grabbed my phone thinking about calling someone, but honestly I didn't even know what I would say. "There's something walking in the hallway?" It sounded absurd even to me. Then I heard the doorknob slowly move. Not a strong attempt to open it, just a slow, careful motion, almost testing whether the door was locked. At that moment I became absolutely certain there was someone outside. And the worst part was that I couldn't hear breathing anymore. No footsteps either. Just the doorknob slowly moving in the complete silence of the house. I stayed frozen for maybe 10 minutes after that. At some point the sounds completely stopped. I didn't hear footsteps leaving or a door closing in the hallway. Just silence. I think I eventually dozed off sitting on the floor against my bed because I woke up with daylight already coming through the window. The first thing I did was open my bedroom door and immediately looked toward the hallway. Everything looked normal again. The room door at the end of the hallway was closed. No sign of movement. Just the same long, silent hallway as always. I went downstairs to the kitchen, determined to leave that house as soon as possible. But when I told Martin about the doorknob moving during the night, he went genuinely pale. I directly asked whether anyone else had access to the second floor during the night, and he answered way too quickly that nobody did. Then I mentioned the shadow in the hallway and the breathing sounds. Martin stayed silent for a few seconds, staring into his mug before saying something that made me feel even worse. He said the previous owner's son used to sleep in the room at the end of the hallway before he died. I asked how he died, but Martin didn't answer immediately. He only said they had found the boy walking around the house in the middle of the night several times before what happened. When I asked what exactly had happened, he simply stood up from the table and said I should look for another place to live if it bothered me that much. And in that moment, I clearly realized he didn't want to continue that conversation at all. That same day, I started looking for another place to stay. Honestly, I had already decided to leave the house no matter what was really happening there. Even if everything had a normal explanation, I couldn't sleep peacefully in that hallway anymore. I spent almost the entire afternoon outside working from a cafe, just to avoid going back home early. When night came, I started feeling real anxiety just thinking about going upstairs again. I got back around 10 because I needed to grab some clothes and continue apartment hunting on my computer. The second I walked in, I noticed the house was way too quiet. No TV on, no sounds from the kitchen. I called for Martin and nobody answered. The other tenants apparently weren't home either. I walked upstairs trying not to look directly toward the end of the hallway, but obviously I looked. The room door remained closed. Even so, I immediately got that awful feeling that something was different. I think it was the air. The hallway felt colder than the rest of the house. I quickly entered my room and locked the door. I spent the next few hours trying to distract myself on the computer while searching for apartments, but I couldn't stop paying attention to every sound in the house. Every tiny creak of the floor made my body tense up, and shortly after midnight I heard that dragging sound from the hallway again, this time much closer to my room from the start. The sound slowly crossed the hallway, dragging, light footsteps, long pause, then dragging again. Now it sounded like it was moving around the entire hallway, not just near the locked room. I sat on my bed listening to it for several minutes without the courage to move. Then I heard something different, a quiet knock coming from the wall beside my bed. Tap, then another tap. My blood instantly went cold because that wall connected directly to the locked room at the end of the hallway. The knocks continued slowly and far apart, like someone pressing their knuckles against the wall from the other side. I immediately backed away from the bed, unable to believe what I was hearing. Then the hallway went silent again. A few seconds later, I heard light footsteps outside my room. This time there was absolutely no doubt. Someone was slowly walking through the hallway. The floor creaked in slow intervals, approaching my door. One step, pause, another step. My heart was racing while I stared at the doorknob, waiting for it to move again. But instead I heard something else. A slow dragging sound coming directly from the locked room door at the end of the hallway, like something heavy was being pulled out of the room. And right after that came the clearest sound I had heard so far. Bare footsteps slowly walking down the hallway toward my bedroom. Story 5. I live with my wife and our 6-year-old daughter in a more remote area outside Asheville, North Carolina. We moved there because we wanted more space and a quiet place to raise our daughter away from the city. The house sits on a large property surrounded by open land and dense woods in the back. And when I say isolated, I mean truly isolated. The nearest house is several minutes away by car. During the day, the place is beautiful. Very quiet, enormous trees, cold air early in the morning, and that kind of peace that feels impossible in a big city. But at night, the property became completely different. There were no streetlights nearby, so after dark, the land practically disappeared into darkness. Only the porch light and a few weak lamps near the garage illuminated part of the yard. Everything else became shadows and trees moving with the wind. I wasn't afraid of that place at first. I grew up in a small town, used to forests and nighttime wilderness sounds. Crickets, branches snapping, distant coyotes, all of that felt normal to me. My daughter loved playing in the yard during the day and was always exploring near the back fence where the tree line began. It was about 3 months after we moved in that she started talking about the man in the woods. And honestly, at first my wife and I thought it was just childish imagination. The first time happened during dinner. My daughter simply pointed toward the kitchen window and asked why that man stood near the trees every night. I remember exchanging a quick glance with my wife before asking what she was talking about. She casually answered that there was a man standing in the dark looking at the house. When we walked to the window, obviously we saw nothing except the dark yard and the tree line in the distance. We asked what he looked like, and she only said that he never came closer and always stayed in the same spot between the trees. We tried not to encourage it because little kids mix imagination and reality all the time. Over the next few days, she kept mentioning it occasionally, always at night, always saying the man was standing back there watching the house. At some point, I started noticing that she avoided playing near the back part of the property once it started getting dark. Even so, I still didn't take it seriously. But about a week later, something happened that genuinely started bothering me. I was closing the living room curtains around 11 at night when I noticed a dark shape standing near the tree line. Too far away to distinguish details, it looked like a vertical, motionless silhouette among the trees. At first, I thought it was a trunk or a shadow caused by the porch light. But after a few seconds, I realized the shape looked far too human to completely ignore. I stared at it for maybe a full minute, trying to convince myself it was just a crooked tree or strange shadow caused by the darkness. The problem was that the longer I stared, the more it looked like a person standing completely still among the trees. I couldn't make out a face or clothes, just the dark outline of someone tall standing at the edge of the woods facing the house. My first reaction was immediately trying to rationalize it. I thought maybe it was a hunter, a lost neighbor, someone crossing onto the wrong property. But none of that made sense because the person never moved. And who would stand completely motionless in the dark staring at an isolated house at almost 11 at night? My wife noticed how quiet I had become and asked what I was looking at. When I showed her, she also stared at the tree line silently for several seconds. Then she said exactly what I was trying to believe myself. It's probably a tree trunk. But I could tell from her voice that she wasn't fully convinced either. I closed the curtains faster than usual that night, and for the first time since moving there, I felt that strange discomfort of looking toward the windows after dark. A few minutes later, my daughter came into the living room asking for water and casually asked whether the man was still there. Neither of us answered immediately. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to the back area of the property. During the daytime, it felt impossible to imagine someone standing there watching the house. The tree line sat relatively far away, beyond the old wooden fence marking the end of the yard. Even so, every night I automatically looked toward that spot before closing the curtains. And several times I thought I saw the silhouette again, always in the same place, always motionless, never close enough to distinguish details, just a dark presence standing among the trees. My wife started becoming uncomfortable too, although she tried not to show it around our daughter. One night she asked whether I thought we should call the police, but honestly, what would I even say? There's possibly a person standing near the woods? It sounded ridiculous without any proof, so I started doing something that now feels kind of ridiculous looking back. I would grab a powerful flashlight and shine it across the tree line before going to bed. Every time the same thing happened. The light would sweep across trunks, branches, and tall grass, but never reveal anyone. Even so, the moment I turned the flashlight off, the feeling returned. Like someone was still standing there in the darkness just beyond the reach of the light. And the more this continued, the worse my daughter became. She started asking to sleep with the light on and repeatedly asked whether the doors were locked before bed. One night I woke around 2 in the morning to hear my daughter crying in the hallway. When I opened the bedroom door, she was standing there holding her blanket looking toward the staircase. My wife woke up startled too and asked what happened. My daughter answered something that instantly made me uncomfortable. She said the man from the woods was closer to the house that night. We tried calming her down by saying she had a bad dream, but she insisted she saw someone looking through her bedroom window. Her room is upstairs facing the back of the property. I carried her upstairs to show her nobody was outside. The yard was completely dark beyond the weak glow of the back porch light. The tree line moved slightly with the cold wind that night. I stood there for several seconds staring into the darkness trying to spot any movement. And then I saw that same shape again standing near the trees, this time clearer because my eyes had adjusted to the darkness. It definitely looked like a person, tall, motionless. My daughter immediately pointed and whispered, "See?" I felt cold spread up my arm instantly. My wife stood beside me staring too without saying anything. None of us wanted to say out loud that we were seeing exactly what our daughter had been describing for weeks. I immediately closed her curtains and brought her into our room to sleep that night. Then I went downstairs alone to check the locks again. While locking the back door, I got that very clear feeling that someone was watching the house in that moment. The kitchen was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the wind hitting the trees outside. I eventually turned off the downstairs lights and walked to the living room window to look once more through a crack in the curtain. The silhouette was still there, same place without moving, and what genuinely started bothering me was realizing that maybe that person had been there much longer than we imagined, maybe watching the house night after night while we slept. I grabbed my phone and tried digitally zooming the camera to get a better look, but the image only became grainy and dark. Even so, you could still clearly make out a vertical figure standing among the trees. I seriously considered getting in the car and driving out there to check, but honestly, the mere thought of walking across that dark yard toward the woods caused an immediate irrational fear. So I stayed there behind the curtain staring at the silhouette until it slowly disappeared into the trees several minutes later. It didn't turn or walk away normally. It just vanished into the darkness of the forest as if it had simply stepped backward a few feet. The next morning I tried acting like nothing had happened because our daughter was already frightened enough. Even so, my wife and I had a serious conversation about it while our daughter watched cartoons in the living room. For the first time, we admitted out loud that there probably really was someone appearing near the tree line at night. My wife wanted to call the police immediately, but I still hesitated because we had no concrete proof besides a distant silhouette in the dark. So I decided to check the back area of the property during the daytime. I grabbed an old shotgun I mostly kept around for home security and walked toward the fence near the woods. The place looked completely normal in daylight. Dry leaves on the ground, deer tracks near the brush, and the strong smell of damp earth typical for that area. Even so, the moment I approached the tree line, I got an immediate bad feeling. Like I was entering a place where someone had spent a long time watching the house. I started searching for signs of footprints or a makeshift campsite and found several strange things. Broken branches in one particular area behind the trees and empty cans hidden among the tall grass. Nothing terrifying by itself, but enough to show that someone really could have been staying there. The worst part was finding marks on the ground at an opening between the trees that gave a direct view into our house windows. From there you could clearly see the kitchen, part of the living room, and the upstairs hallway. That night I left all the exterior lights on for the first time since we moved in. I also placed a chair near the living room window and spent hours watching the yard while pretending to watch TV. My wife thought maybe that would scare away whoever had been appearing there. Honestly, I wanted to believe that too. But around midnight I turned off the TV and automatically looked toward the tree line again. And the silhouette was there. Exactly the same spot. Motionless as always. My heart instantly dropped because it meant the person was still coming back, even with all the lights on. And clearly knowing we were paying attention now, I called my wife over without taking my eyes off the window, and she went completely silent when she saw it too. We both stared for several minutes waiting for movement. Nothing. Then I grabbed the powerful flashlight again and pointed it directly toward the trees. The beam crossed the trunks, and in that exact moment the silhouette simply wasn't there anymore. It didn't walk away. It didn't run. It just disappeared between one moment and the next. And that scared me much more than seeing it standing there, because it meant whoever was there had probably moved the instant they noticed the light. I stayed awake the rest of the night staring through the windows. And sometime around 3 in the morning, I realized something even worse. The tree line remained empty. But now I couldn't stop thinking about where that person might be hiding somewhere in the darkness of the property. From that night on, I started doing patrols around the yard before bed, always carrying the flashlight and shotgun. My wife hated it and said I was putting myself in danger. But honestly, I couldn't relax inside the house anymore without checking the entire property first. Even during the daytime, I started realizing how much more isolated the property really was than it had seemed when we bought the house. If someone truly wanted to hide near the woods and watch the house, they could probably do it for weeks without anyone noticing. On the third night after we started leaving the exterior lights on, something happened that disturbed me more than anything before. Our daughter walked into the kitchen while I was making coffee and asked why the man was walking closer to the house now. I immediately felt pressure in my chest hearing that. I asked what she meant, and she casually answered that she could see him more clearly through her bedroom window. My wife instantly turned pale. That night we went up to her room early and waited for the house lights to reflect across the dark yard outside. We spent several minutes staring toward the trees without seeing anything. Then my daughter pointed toward the right side of the tree line, and there he was again. Except this time he was definitely closer to the back fence. still motionless, still too dark to distinguish a face or clothes, but closer than any previous night. My wife genuinely started panicking at that point. She wanted to call the police immediately, and for the first time I agreed without hesitation. I called and explained that someone kept repeatedly appearing near the edge of our property at night watching the house. 2 officers arrived about 40 minutes later. While waiting for them, I kept staring through the window the entire time. At one point, the silhouette disappeared again into the trees. When the officers arrived, I brought them to the back of the property and showed them exactly where we saw the person every night. They shined powerful flashlights into the woods and even walked several feet into the trees, but obviously they found nobody. One of the officers said it could just be a hunter crossing private property, or even a homeless person sleeping in the woods. But when I mentioned that our daughter had been describing the same figure for weeks, both officers became more serious. They recommended installing cameras and reinforcing the doors. They also told us to call immediately if we saw anyone again. After they left, I tried convincing my wife that maybe this would finally stop now that the police had shown up. But that night I woke up around 4 in the morning because dogs from neighboring properties were barking frantically in the distance, and when I looked through the back window, my stomach instantly turned cold. The tree line was empty. For the first time since all of this began, there was no silhouette standing back there. At first I almost felt relieved realizing nobody was standing at the tree line. After weeks of staring at the same spot every night, seeing it empty finally felt like the person had gone away. But that feeling lasted only a few seconds. Because immediately I started thinking something much worse. If the person wasn't back there anymore, then where were they? I stood staring into the completely dark yard trying to spot any movement near the fence. The wind had calmed down and everything felt far too quiet. No sounds from the woods, no snapping branches, nothing. That's when I noticed something else strange. The motion sensor lights near the garage were on. They normally only activated when something moved near the side of the house. My heart immediately started pounding hard. I grabbed the flashlight and walked to the kitchen, trying to look through the side window, without exposing myself too much. I didn't see anyone. Even so, that horrible sensation of being watched returned instantly. My wife came up behind me asking what was happening, and when I mentioned the lights, she became fully awake immediately. We both stood there silently staring into the dark yard for several minutes. Then I heard a low sound outside. A sharp branch snapped near the back porch. Not in the woods. Much closer to the house. I instantly grabbed the flashlight and quickly illuminated the yard through the glass back door. Nobody was visible, but something on the ground immediately caught my attention. There were marks in the wet grass leading toward the house. My stomach dropped before I even fully understood what I was seeing. I opened the door only a few inches and shined the light more carefully. They were footprints, large, clearly human, coming from the direction of the tree line and crossing the entire yard. The worst part was realizing how far they went. The tracks didn't stop halfway across the property. They came almost all the way up to the back porch of the house. My wife saw the footprints over my shoulder and immediately started crying. I shut the door instantly and locked everything again, while my brain tried to process what that meant, because for weeks the person had stayed far away at the edge of the woods only watching. Now someone had crossed the yard in the dark while we slept, and I had no idea how long that had been happening without us realizing. I called the police again, practically shaking, while describing the footprints near the house. While waiting for the patrol car, I stood staring through the kitchen window holding the flashlight and trying to spot any movement in the yard. And then the thing happened that stayed with me more than anything else that night. A few feet from the porch near my daughter's swing set, there was another footprint partially illuminated by the exterior light, and it was pointed directly toward her bedroom window.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.